Amina's one consolation was the unborn child of her dead husband, and her solace increased as the time of her delivery drew near. She was conscious of a light within her, and one day it shone forth from her so intensely that she could see the castles of Bostra in Syria. And she heard a voice say to her, "Thou carriest in thy womb the Lord of this people, and when he is born, say, I place him beneath the protection of the One, from the evil of every envier. Then name him Muhammad." Some weeks later the child was born. Amina was in the home of her uncle, and she sent word to Abdul Muttalib, asking him to come to see his grandson. He took the boy in his arms and carried him to the sanctuary and into the holy house, where he prayed a prayer of thanksgiving to God for this gift. Then he brought him once more to his mother, but on the way he showed him to his own household. He himself was shortly to have another son by Amina's cousin, Hala. At the moment his youngest son was the 3-year-old Abbas, who now met him at the door of his house. "This is thy brother. Kiss him," he said, holding out to him the newborn babe. And Abbas kissed him. It was the custom of all the great families of Arab towns to send their sons, soon after their birth, into the desert to be suckled and weaned and spend part of their childhood amongst one of the Bedouin tribes. Nor had Mecca any reason for being an exception, since epidemics were not infrequent and the rate of infant mortality was high. But it was not only the desert's fresh air that they wished their sons to imbibe. That was for their bodies, but the desert had also its bounty for souls. Quraysh had only recently taken to the sedentary life. Until Qusay had told them to build themselves houses round the sanctuary, they had been more or less nomadic. Fixed settlements were perhaps inevitable, but they were dangerous. Their ancestors' way of life had been the nobler one, the life of tent-dwellers, often on the move. Nobility and freedom were inseparable, and the nomad was free. In the desert, a man was conscious of being the lord of space, and in virtue of that lordship he escaped in a sense from the domination of time. By striking camp, he sloughed off his yesterdays, and tomorrow seemed less of a fatality, if its where as well as its when had yet to come. But the townsman was a prisoner, and to be fixed in one place, yesterday, today, tomorrow, was to be a target for time, the ruiner of all things. Towns were places of corruption. Sloth and slovenliness lurked in the shadow of their walls, ready to take the edge off a man's alertness and vigilance. Everything decayed there, even language, one of man's most precious possessions. Few of the Arabs could read, but beauty of speech was a virtue which all Arab parents desired for their children. A man's worth was largely assessed by his eloquence, and the crown of eloquence was poetry. To have a great poet in the family was indeed something to be proud of. And the best poets were nearly always from one or another of the desert tribes, for it was in the desert that the spoken language was nearest to poetry. So the bond with the desert had to be renewed in every generation. Fresh air for the breast, pure Arabic for the tongue, freedom for the soul. And many of the sons of Quraysh were kept as long as 8 years in the desert, so that it might make a lasting impression upon them, though a lesser number of years was enough for that. Some of the tribes had a high reputation for nursing and rearing children, and amongst these were the Bani Sa'd ibn Bakr, an outlying branch of Hawazin, whose territory lay to the southeast of Mecca. Amina was in favor of entrusting her son to the care of a woman of this tribe. They came periodically to Quraysh for nurslings, and some were expected shortly. On their arrival, Amina's choice fell upon one of their number, Halima, the daughter of Abu Du'aib, who was accompanied by her husband Harith and a recently born son of their own, whom she was nursing. In after years she told of the subsequent events. "With the child," she said, "we returned to our tents in the Bani Sa'd country, and I know of no place on God's earth more barren than that then was." But after we brought him to live with us, my flock would come home to me replete at every eventide and full of milk. We milked them and drank, when others had no drop of milk. And our neighbours would say to their shepherds, "Out upon you, go graze your flocks where he grazeth his," meaning my shepherd. Yet still their flocks came hungry home, yielding no milk, while mine came well-fed, with milk in plenty. And we ceased not to enjoy this increase and this bounty from God, until the babe's 2 years had passed, and I weaned him. He was growing well, she continued, and none of the other boys could match him for growth. By the time he was 2 years old, he was a well-made child, and we took him again to his mother, although we were eager that he should stay with us for the blessings he brought us. So I said to her, "Leave my little son with me until he grows stronger, for I fear lest he be stricken with the plague of Mecca." And we importuned her until she gave him once more into our keeping, and we brought him again to our home. One day, several months after our return, when he and his brother were with some lambs of ours behind our tents, his brother came running to us and said, "That Qurayshite brother of mine, 2 men clothed in white have taken him and have laid him down and opened his breast, and they are stirring it with their hands." So I and his father went to him, and we found him standing, but his face was very pale. We drew him to us and said, "What aileth thee, my son?" He said, "2 men clothed in white came to me and laid me down and opened my breast, and searched it for I know not what." Halima and Harith, her husband, looked this way and that, but there was no sign of the men, nor was there any blood or any wound to bear out what the 2 boys had said. No amount of questioning would make them take back their words or modify them in any respect. Yet there was not even the trace of a scar on the breast of their foster child, nor any blemish on his perfect little body. The only unusual feature was in the middle of his back, between his shoulders, a small but distinct oval mark where the flesh was slightly raised, as it were from the impress of a cupping glass, but that had been there at his birth. In after years, he was able to describe the event more fully. "There came unto me 2 men, clothed in white, with a gold basin full of snow. Then they laid hold upon me, and splitting open my breast, they brought forth my heart. This likewise they split open, and took from it a black clot, which they cast away. Then they washed my heart and my breast with the snow." He also said, "Satan toucheth every son of Adam the day his mother beareth him, save only Mary and her son." Halima and Harith were convinced that the boys had been speaking the truth, and they were exceedingly shaken in consequence. Harith feared that their foster son had been possessed by an evil spirit, or smitten by some spell, and he told his wife to take him with all speed to his mother before the harm he had suffered became apparent in him. So Halima took him once more to Mecca, intending to say nothing about the real reason for her change of mind. But the change was too abrupt, and Amina, not to be deceived, finally compelled her to recount the whole story. Having heard it, she dismissed Halima's fears, saying, "Great things are in store for my little son." Then she told her of her pregnancy and of the light she had been conscious of carrying within her. Halima was reassured, but this time Amina decided to keep her son. "Leave him with me," she said, "and a good journey home." The boy lived happily in Mecca with his mother for about 3 years, winning the affection of his grandfather and his uncles and aunts and his many cousins with whom he played. Particularly dear to him were Hamza and Safiya, the children of Abdul Muttalib's last marriage, which had taken place on the same day as that of Muhammad's parents. Hamza was his own age, Safiya a little younger, his uncle and his aunt through his father, his cousins through his mother, and a powerful and lasting bond was formed between the 3 of them.